many more around the globe are being vaccinated against COVID-19. There's a lot of talk about whether or not one can in fact still get ill after being vaccinated, especially on social media. Aisha Abdul-Karim is a senior journalist with Begisiza Center for Health Journalism and is joining us now to talk more about this. Hi there, Aisha. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the conversation about breakthrough infections. Let's start with what exactly they are and how frequently they can occur.
Yes. Hi. So essentially what a breakthrough infection is, it's when somebody who has been vaccinated still gets sick. So when it comes to COVID, it means that even though you've received your COVID vaccine and you're fully immunized, you can potentially still contract the disease and fall ill with COVID. At this point, what we know is that it's very rare for you to actually have a breakthrough infection. There is some data that's being gathered from countries that are rolling out their vaccines to see how frequently this does happen. The existing data does show that it's not a very common occurrence, but it does depend on the vaccine. Each vaccine comes with its own efficacy, which means that's how much protection the vaccine is offering to a person. So for instance, the Pfizer vaccine, which is what we're predominantly using in South Africa, has a 95% efficacy. And what that means is that you're 95% less likely to get infected with the coronavirus if you've received the vaccine. So there is that 5% gap, which means that you can still potentially get infected afterwards, but it is quite small and it's significantly reduced as opposed to people who don't get any vaccine. And the other pro to being vaccinated is even if you have a breakthrough infection, what we've seen is that you're most likely to have a mild case of COVID. So the vaccine is still doing a good job in that it's preventing you from developing severe disease and needing hospitalization, so that even if you do get sick, you're just having a very mild case of COVID and potentially even an asymptomatic case where you don't even exhibit any of the signs of being sick with COVID.
Am I right to say that the biggest risk to vaccine efficacy at this stage, and it's what scientists are hoping to avoid by vaccinating as many people as possible, that would be the occurrence of new variants?
Yes, indeed. So variants are a big cause for concern when it comes to vaccines and the protection that they can provide. For South Africa, one of the big concerns was the Beta variant, which was identified towards the end of last year. And that specific version of the virus had changed its structure in a way that it was able to evade your body's natural defense against the virus. And so what that meant is we were now concerned that the vaccines would offer less protection against that particular form of the virus, which was dominant in South Africa. And that was something that we saw both with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was tested in South Africa, along with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, where even though Johnson & Johnson was still able to offer quite a bit of protection, it had a 64% efficacy rate, that was lower when compared against the Beta variant as opposed to the original form of the virus that was circulating. Of course, now the main concern that we have is the Delta variant, which has become dominant in South Africa and is quickly becoming the most dominant variant, overtaking a lot of other forms of the virus around the world, because it is able to spread so quickly. Some of the real-life data that we've seen from the US and from Israel and from England is that the vaccines are offering less protection against the Delta variant. So for instance, in the UK, some of the data that they've gathered showed that the vaccine offered significantly less protection after one dose, but once you had received 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, you were still offered quite a bit of protection, so up to 88% protection from the vaccine against the Delta variant. And so the idea is that, as you pointed out, you want to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible to reduce how much the virus is circulating within a population and prevent, the emergence of more variants entering into into the pandemic.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the Pfizer vaccine, which is going to be given or administered to millions of South Africans. It is a 2-dose vaccine for optimum levels of protection. There have been a few people that I've seen anecdotally on social media saying, look, I've taken the first shot. I feel quite confident that I've got all of this protection now, and I possibly may not even go back for the second shot. And that is not advisable, is it?
No, absolutely not. You should definitely go back to get your second dose. At the moment, South Africa is spacing the doses out so that you get your first dose and then you're supposed to return 6 weeks later to get your second dose. And what we know and what we've seen from other countries is that particularly with the Delta variant, it is becoming more and more important for people to go and get the second dose because you're only at around 30% protection when you only have one dose, and that goes all the way up to 80% or 88%, which is almost 90%, once you get your second dose. So you absolutely need to go and get both doses of your vaccine. And in that window between doses, I want to encourage people to not, act like they are invincible and try and continue their lives as normal, because you are still susceptible to infection, meaning that you are still at risk of getting sick in between doses. And with the breakthrough infections that we are seeing, you are still potentially vulnerable to getting sick even after you've received both doses. And so that's why it's really important that even as we encourage people to go and get vaccines, we also have to emphasize that being vaccinated doesn't mean you can abandon other safety protocols. It doesn't mean that suddenly you don't have to wear a mask everywhere that you go. It doesn't mean you can give up on sanitizing and washing your hands. All of those safety measures combined with vaccines are how we fight this virus.
And so serious is the issue of vaccination that they've got conversations going on in the last week or so. I mean, Pfizer said theirs at the moment is a double-dose vaccine, but they're not ruling out the possibility that they could soon apply in the United States for emergency approval of a third booster shot. Israel is already doing that for their population aged over 60. So it's important to also reflect on the fact that the issue of vaccination will constantly be under review with new variants and, of course, assessments around efficacy of the shots, right?
Yes, so at this stage, it is still too soon to tell if we are going to need booster shots. A lot of vaccine manufacturers, particularly after the Beta variant was identified last year, began, looking at designing vaccines that were geared towards variants. So they're trying to make these shots that can potentially fight off these, new forms of the virus. But one of the concerns I would just express in terms of advocating for boosters is we are facing a huge challenge when it comes to vaccine equity, particularly in Africa, where we have very low coverage on the continent. So I understand that the CDC has made a recommendation not to go for boosters while there is such a limited supply of vaccines globally, because we can't be looking at giving people in richer countries a third dose of a vaccine when the majority of people, on the African continent haven't even gotten one dose of a vaccine yet. So I think that is also an important thing to note when you're considering boosters, is that we first have to make sure enough people are protected with the existing vaccines before we look at, do we need to start giving people a third shot or looking at that kind of boosting immunity in the future.
Aisha Abdul Karim, Senior Journalist at Begisisa Center for Health Journalism. Good to speak to you. Thank you.